I'm delighted that you could all be here. I'm Don Tatzin. I'm mayor this year, and I'm honored to convene this gathering to celebrate Lafayette's 50th birthday. So happy birthday, Lafayette. So like all big birthdays that end with a zero, we're going to celebrate with a big party. In this case, it starts at 4 out in the amphitheater. And this time, we want to save for reflecting and sharing stories on what got Lafayette to where it is today. Now, a few announcements. We've got a time capsule. It's sitting out in front of the Historical Society. Please drop something off. My understanding is that it will be opened on the 75th anniversary of Lafayette's incorporation. And I hope most of us will still be there to enjoy that. Also, what is an anniversary without a gift? In this case, we're promoting the gift of green. That is the opportunity to switch the electricity at your home to 100% renewable resources. There are people from Sustainable Lafayette and the Acalanes Environmental Club who can help you switch to deep green in just a few minutes. You'll see them, they'll be wearing shirts that look like this. And our goal is to have 1,000 deep green households by the end of the year. And today is the most important day of our campaign. So I hope if you haven't switched already, that you can talk to one of these people and figure out how to do it. And it's easy and costs very little. Several months ago, the city added another staff person, Jeff Heyman. And Jeff has brought innovation to how we communicate with all of you. One of the things that he's done, in addition to driving a lot of what's gone on with the celebration, is to put together a short film that pays tribute to Lafayette's history and what it is today. So we're going to start just by watching that. Welcome to Lafayette, and thank you for participating in Lafayette's 50th anniversary of incorporation. I'm Don Tatzin. I'm this year's mayor, and it's my honor to be mayor during this special anniversary year. We invite you, whether you're someone who's lived here for a month or whether you're someone who's lived here for more than 50 years, to participate in the festivities and to think about what incorporation of this community means to you. Have a great time. Enjoy the party.
Every great city has a story to tell. The story behind the development of Lafayette into what it is today began on a single street. Like many cities in California, the street came first and the town grew around it. But thanks to the vision of a few dedicated individuals, this thoroughfare connecting San Francisco to Martinez, that was once lined with mismatched signs and boarded up buildings, is now the center of a vibrant, semi-rural community. One of the jewels of the East Bay.
Lafayette was really acting like a city even before it became a city, I think. It had a group of people that was really interested in seeing it develop interestingly and appropriately.
When I first came to Lafayette, part of the NYU law program was a lawyer's duty to his community to be a communitarian, participate, and help out. So that was just a function of carrying on those activities and becoming active in the Lafayette Improvement Association.
From day one, it was all about fairly large groups of citizens making change. When we incorporated, there were 20 candidates. Every candidate was an enthusiast about incorporation. We didn't have a single naysayer in the group. And so for a year plus, all 20 of us traveled the city talking about the timeliness of incorporation.
The blueprint for the management of Lafayette was set by this fellow, Erling Horn. And we're all indebted to him because he laid a very stable financial foundation for the city and a stable set of practices that have allowed us to persist with great finances for a long, long time.
I think that's quite unique that City of Lafayette has an unpaid city council. So the more you pay a city council people and the mayor, the lousier the city is.
It's a spirit of of humanity and civility and just a community in this town. And it's very rich.
I don't think it's a Lafayette thing. I think it's in your makeup that if you feel like you've had a good life, you want to make it good for somebody else.
Really, it's a community that makes a community.
So, yeah, must be in the water.
We all found common ground. We found the things that were important to all of us. And so it made it really easy to come together to work on things.
We learned fairly quickly, and we worked very hard at it.
Where we now have a street scene. We have a park in the center of town that people use.
And just barely half mile away, you can walk to the Lafayette Reservoir, which is a 550-acre wilderness preserve.
The other thing that's nice is the downtown has attracted both more businesses and more residents.
Lafayette is now a community of mixed-use businesses and public gathering places that is close to public transportation with attractive storefronts, over 70 restaurants, 3 art galleries, a dedicated area for public art exhibits in the expanded library and community center, a local theater, and is home to hundreds of year-round activities.
Lafayette is known for its green hills and its great schools.
We've been extraordinarily lucky that we've had councils that work together. That doesn't mean that everybody agrees on everything, but we really do work to make things happen in Lafayette for the benefit of everyone.
That meant that a lot of people that got the necessary work done were doing it on a service basis.
This idea of preserving the natural environment to the greatest extent possible and trying to make this place that's just fantastically livable, both in its urban characteristics and its quick escape into the natural world.
Be proud of it, cherish it, value it, support it, become involved. You don't find communities like this everywhere. It's a very rare community.
Lafayette already had a lot of things going for it when we incorporated in 1968. However, one thing we didn't have at the time was a poet laureate. We now have one, and I would like to introduce Amy Glynn, Lafayette's first poet laureate.
Hi. I saw a movie at the Park Theater. It was 2005. Still remember it was about penguins. It was really depressing. So it's not the theater's fault. They have a hard life. Anyway, I've gotten to the point, I'm a little bit younger than the city, not by much, and I've gotten to the point where I've found myself telling my children stories about how you used to be able to make that drive from Oakland to Walnut Creek and maybe see a couple other cars, you know, and they're like, yeah, Mom, we know, and Daddy rode to school on a dinosaur, you know, but there we are. Things have changed, and as I was asked to concoct something for this conclave of mayors and enthusiasts, I was thinking about poetry of place and how that is tied to change and our desire to see things as not changing even though they invariably do. And this was spawned by that place where the traffic always comes to a screeching halt just west of Akalani's Road as you're heading east, you know, and you get that perfect view of Mount Diablo. And then it's just perfectly framed, and which is nice because you're going to be there for a while. Anyway, so this is called Traffic, Mount Diablo Valley. Origin stories shift. Once, that mountaintop was seabed. Once, we imagined it was the source of all creation. Once, there was a legend in which a zealot priest had met the devil in a thicket up there somewhere. In my imagination, it was an afternoon like this one, an epic scorcher, the height of the fire season, the hills coarse gold and gathered tense as crouched cats. Something is always displacing something in a fire system. Overgrowth becomes tinder, becomes tongues of scathing flame, becomes tree bones and birds of ash. Perhaps the devil even spoke brush fire when he told the priest his day was ending. Maybe there was no devil, no priest, just a need to taxonomize displacement. Nothing is moving. The traffic is always like this now, implacable. And in a way, it's nice to have consistency, though everyone does complain. It doesn't seem sustainable. The stories we tell ourselves now misunderstand sustainability. It is not the same as equipoise or holding still or damage control. It's the devil warning the man in the habit that others were coming just as they had in their turn, and there won't be room for everyone. You can tell that story in Spanish or Vulgate Latin or fire or gridlock, and either way, the tension gives way to chaos and then rebuilds. The valley oaks droop in the heat, and the oily laurels exude their phenolics, almost like they're throwing a gauntlet. We're attracted to the practice of naming things. We're attracted to order. The mountain is too, though it looks at it differently. As a child, I used to believe the red glare on the western face came from inside the mountain, as though it were burning in there. I believed it was named for the devil because of this. I had not yet been taught displacement, but everything we might know about place is just one part of a story, and even the mountain is not really standing still. In a fire ecology, chaos gives rise to resilience, and if you think about it, sometimes it's not bad to be forced to stop. When you are, it's a simple enough thing to imagine you're under the very crucible of creation and in your right place, and then nothing can ever change that. Thank you.
So let's spend a few minutes figuring out who we have in the room. How many of you have lived in Lafayette for 50 years or more? How many of you have owned businesses or worked in Lafayette for 50 years or more? Not quite as many. Okay. How many of you have served on the city council at one time during those 50 years? And how many of you have taken care of people who served on the city council at one time during those 50 years? How many of you have served on school boards or other volunteer positions in town? Okay. And how many of you love Lafayette? So George Wasson, an early council member, but I don't think on the very first council, reminded me that the path to incorporation was neither easy nor simple. And so George is asked to share a story with us.
Well, Don properly introduced me as a person who had been here for a few years. We moved to Lafayette in 1957, and I had been here in the Bay Area when I was in the service, and I figured there wasn't any place else in the world to live other than the Bay Area. It turned out that my wife's sister and her husband lived in Pleasant Hill. Her aunt and uncle lived in Oakland, and halfway in between those two places is the city of Lafayette, or what was then Lafayette. And I went to school in Indiana at Purdue University at West Lafayette, Indiana. So I've got a lot of history. Anyway, the important thing was that I was involved with another luncheon club, and I invited a guy to speak. It turned out that he and his family owned the Four Winds dwarf citrus plant, or first nursery, and they're down in Fremont. And he had been the mayor of Fremont, I think several times, but he was also very, very active in the League of California Cities. And so we had the Lafayette Improvement Association arranged a town hall meeting at Town Hall. And I've forgotten who all was on the panel, but Don Dillon was one of them. And when we asked him, what do you think of Lafayette? And he said, well, you have a wonderful city, you have a nice community, but you don't deserve it. And I thought, what do you mean? Well, what he was saying was, you got to work at it. You don't just go to the poll every couple of years and put in a ballot. The fact is, you've got to get out and do your politics. You've got to talk to everyone in the neighborhood, in your community. Everybody needs to know why Lafayette needs to incorporate. For instance, the Lafayette Improvement Association was about the only contact we had with the Board of Supervisors or the planning, which was all done in Martinez. And you know, you cannot trust anybody who comes from Richmond or Brentwood or someplace like that, you know, because they don't know what we're doing. So anyway, I think the answer clearly was that that word, you don't deserve it, erupted in the community. And we all got very, very busy. Bob mentioned that there were 20-some people who were candidates. I was one of them. We did not expect to be elected, but we did expect to get out and talk to everybody in the community. We went to coffees morning, noon, and night, and we told people why Lafayette should be incorporated and why we deserved it. So I think that Don Dillon has a lot to do, maybe one of the additional founders of the City of Lafayette. Thank you very much for Don's introduction to You Don't Deserve It.
Well, thank you. So following Don Dillon's advice, people went out and they did work hard enough. And the citizens decided that we did deserve it, and incorporation was approved. So at 7 p.m. on July 29th, 1968, at the former Veterans Memorial Building, which stands roughly where we are today, the recently elected council members of the newly incorporated City of Lafayette came together for their first meeting, and thus started the habit of meeting until after midnight, or beyond, a tradition which we have still not fully broken. But let's listen in on the beginning of that first council meeting.
Ladies and gentlemen, a certified copy of the resolution and order of the Board of Supervisors declaring the City of Lafayette Incorporated as a general law city was filed with the Secretary of State July 22nd, 1968, and the county clerk's affidavit stating that all requirements of law pertaining to incorporation were complied with was filed with the county recorder this day, July 29, 1968. In accordance with the law, the city came into existence today, July 29, 1968.
So we're honored to have two members of that first city council with us this afternoon, Donn Black and Bob Fisher. We're going to run the rest of the session like one big public comment session. People have been passing around little speaker slips. You can speak for 3 minutes. And then if you want to be last, you hold on to your speaker slip for a little while, and you try and turn it in at the right time before we run out of time. But I would like our Don and Bob Fisher to go first. So, Don.
A very preliminary remark to George Wasson, who stumbled across the stage pretty much as I did. I discovered on my 88th birthday last week that in Japan, when you turn 88, you are thereby ancient treasure. So it's a pleasure to be ancient treasure. A greater pleasure is to see all of you here this evening carrying on the fine tradition that got the city incorporated. That is concern about where you live. Without that, we wouldn't have this building, we wouldn't have so many things that Lafayette, as a marvelous place in the world, now has to offer. And so I just want to thank everybody who had a big part in that, and I know most of you probably did, for helping out. When I came to that part of it, that is getting the vote out, I was pretty much at a loss. I knew nothing about politics, et cetera, et cetera. So I took all my cues from Bob Fisher. He was the politician in the group. And I'll just cite one example to prove my point. When it came to getting out the vote, Bob simply went down to the grocery store and volunteered to carry the ladies' groceries out to their car. Never would have occurred to me, but congratulations, Bob. So here this afternoon, I am again experiencing the great satisfaction that I felt the night that it was announced that our efforts had been successful and that we were a city. Two quick notes. The first impetus I felt about the need to incorporate was a study that was being touted at Cal Berkeley by, I guess, a landscape or an architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. And he was running a class and had some manuals called the Design Project. And somebody in our crew contacted him about what we were doing to get advice. And he said, well, listen, you can have your own design project. And that was the genesis of the organization that served alongside the Lafayette Improvement Association to foster incorporation. And it was called the Lafayette Design Project. And it gave us our clues as to what we needed to do, not only to make a successful election, but to make a successful city. And I must say, though I've not gotten to spend nearly the time here that I would have liked, it looks like we all did a good job and that we got pretty much what we bargained for, a great new city. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.
It's hard to believe that 50 years has passed. I used to joke with my fellow councilmen when we met in executive session. I said, you know, I'm that much younger than all of you. I will be here to write the history when you're all gone and are in no position to contradict me, as Don would today. There are only a couple of us left who remember a lot of things that happened in closed session. I remember waking up after the morning after the election and saying, oh my God, what have we done to ourselves? We don't have a plan, we don't have a policy, we don't have a staff member, we hardly know each other, we know nothing. I called Leonard Grote, the voice of the mayor of Pleasant Hill. Pleasant Hill had incorporated 10 years earlier. I said, Len, can I come over and ask you what we should do? Leonard told us what we should do. And symbolically, he passed the baton as 7 years after our first election, I did as chair of the mayor's conference and chair of LAFCO in swearing in the first city council of the town of Moraga. So as Amy said today, so poetically as our laureate, change happens. We incorporated because we were worried about the impact of change on Lafayette. We were frightened about the opening of BART 2 years later. We were frightened about a general plan in the county that showed our ceiling population at 65,000 when we had 17,000 population then. We came together and we knew that with Charlie Williams' direction, my neighbor who was the city attorney of Pleasant Hill, that our major project would be to get a great city manager. Don may or may not remember that we interviewed three. One was the city manager of Stockton, and the world has never known this. One was the city manager of, I believe, Pinole, and the world has never known this. And one was Ernie Mariner, 13-year city manager of Pittsburgh. We fell in love with Ernie, and Ernie's signature, as Steve Falk has so eloquently said in the film, is all over our community of Lafayette. One of our first commitments, and then I'll close, is that Lafayette was a community of participants. This was not a community to be run by five. This was not an oligarchy of people who had been successfully elected. Among the first things we did was to appoint a BART commission. Gordon Holmes became its chair. A second thing we did was to have Don appoint a fire services commission, and he asked me to be the chair of that because if we could make a decision before the end of December to move into the consolidated fire district, we would enjoy some benefits that we wouldn't otherwise enjoy if we delayed. Among the most important things we did included the appointment of the 49ers. Norm Tuttle is here today. We asked Norm to head a citizens group of 49 people, leaders in the community, and there are some in the room, on 7 different committees to define what our community values were as part of a general plan to be drafted by Gordon Hall and Associates. Implicit in this very broad involvement of citizens in these and many other commissions, because at one point during our first 4 or 5 years, we had 300 commissioners involved in every aspect of the city, was that this is our town. R with a big O-U-R. This is a true democracy, emphasizing volunteerism and involvement. So coming back to what Don has said, this is a place that's very special. Love it, protect it, cherish it, become involved, stay involved. And for many people in this room, defined by the invitation list, you have been involved, and I congratulate you and thank you.
So every council meeting now begins with public comment. So this is an opportunity for people to speak on items that are within our purview but not on our agenda. The rest of today's meeting is one big public comment session. You can talk about anything that relates to Lafayette, your views of incorporation, why Lafayette is special to you, etc. But we have one guideline, 3 minutes or less. And I'm just going to take speaker slips as they arrive. So I did want to say just a couple of thank yous. I had Don talks about being 88. I had an opportunity to speak with Richard Holmes yesterday. Richard is unfortunately unable to be here. He was elected to the council in 1983 and served for 8 years and was a brother of Gordon Holmes, who was on the first council. Richard is 97, so he's probably the oldest living council member. I also spoke with Yvonne Wilson, who served alongside Dick Holmes, and her husband's recovering from surgery, and so she's unable to be here, but wanted to extend her appreciation to all of you and her thanks for the opportunity to serve in the city. So our first speaker is Chris Coons, followed by Judy Garvens.
Thank you, Don. 50 years ago, yesterday, Dean and I piled 5 children into a blue station wagon and left Cincinnati, Ohio, and our destination on arrival was yesterday, 50 years ago, to Lafayette. We came in that week of 1968. And our 6th child was born in 1969 here in Lafayette. But we were privileged to be in proximity in our neighbor in off Upper Happy Valley with our dear friends, Bob and Ellie Fisher and children, for all these years. And we are so blessed to call them part of our family. It has been so exciting to be a part of Lafayette as it's grown. Dean and I were privileged to be asked to be on the early commissions. Dean on walkways. I was asked to be on the first senior commission, and daughter Kathy, sitting here, was on the first youth commission. All these years, we have worked together in this community. Such love and support and friendship. It's just so refreshing, and it's so exciting to be a part. I have been a part, and I am doing the best I can to continue this. A year and a half ago, I moved to our new senior assisted living resident down the street called Merrill Gardens, where I am happy and content and was privileged to be on a committee, and many are in this room, as we worked for a long time to get the 2 senior residents here on Mount Diablo built, because it took us a long time to get the chateau built for seniors, independent living on Moraga Boulevard. And these are just a few of the things that we have been a part of, and there are so many in this room that I owe a great deal of thanks and love to, because of the support you've given me since I lost my sight 10 years ago. So I'm thrilled to love Lafayette. It's a wonderful place.
Judy.
Kent and I moved here in 1970, so we missed the incorporation. We moved here because we had lived in Orinda, and I was active in League of Women Voters, and in land use in particular. And I saw what was happening in La Morinda, and I thought, Lafayette is smart, and I want to live there, so we did it. I got involved in the parking commission. Oh, well, we tried. And then the planning commission, and I was cleaning out a closet the other day. You do that at my stage in life. And I found this article, Lafayette prefers rentals to condos. The first no since the trend began. Planning commissioners this week rejected a controversial application to convert the city's largest apartment complex, Lafayette Highlands, into condominiums. Remember? It's the one behind the car wash. What's it called now? It's the first time the commission has turned down such a request since the conversion movement began in the town. Isn't that amazing? The application submitted by Heritage Properties was turned down by a vote to 4-1. One member abstained. We still think, okay, this is the person. Planner Judy Garvens, Marv Hylison, Hirsch Morton, and Guy Atwood rejected the application. This is my quote. In a community like ours, we need to have a certain amount of rental stock. Here we are. Anyway, it's been a great pleasure being a part of all this, and on we go.
So our next speaker, and maybe Jeff, you could hand her a microphone, is Ann Hoisington, and she'll be followed by Erling Horn.
Raise your hand. Oh.
All right.
I'd just like to remind everyone that years ago we celebrated our sesquicentennial, and we had a lovely scrapbook where people were able to sign it at 4 different events. You may have been one of the people that signed it, and today it's out on the counter out here. Look up your name when you signed it then, and then you can sign it again today. Thank you.
And in addition to that, you'll see that there are little sign-in books that'll be spread around, and so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to sign one. They're out on the counter, and they'll be down below during the rest of the party. Mayor Horn.
50 years ago, the citizens of Lafayette made a right and proper choice by establishing city limits and voting to officially create Lafayette. We were founded as a no property tax and low service city with an elected city council, committees, and commissions made up of unpaid volunteers. We are still a low tax service city with unpaid volunteers. But now, we receive a very small portion of our property taxes refunded back to the city. The benefits of cityhood have been manifestly good. We have a creek master plan and clean creeks. We have first-class ball fields and community parks for our kids and our families. We have a general plan that keeps houses off our exposed ridges, and maintains the semi-rural nature of our neighborhoods. We have improved roads and drains that meet high standards. We have public trails and bike paths through our community. We have a first-class library and learning center. And the veterans have a new building. And in addition to that, we have a downtown picnic and concert lawn at the Elam and Margaret Brown Plaza Park. You have seen pictures of Elam and Margaret Brown up there. These benefits, in addition to that, we even have an exciting public art that can be seen in many locations throughout town. The benefits and improvements have not been possible without incorporation. We now control our own destiny through the stewardship of you, our valuable volunteer citizens. The County Board of Supervisors would not have provided the work and the necessities that produced the city of Lafayette that we now know today. If you look at the photos of downtown Lafayette in 1968, and you have been, you will see a strip of Bacon Mount Diablo Boulevard. You'll see gas stations galore, broken sidewalks, no trees. You couldn't even buy a deli sandwich then. You know what? We've come a long way, baby.
So our next speaker is Gene Williamson, followed by another former mayor, Scott Talan. That's up to you. You two can figure that out.
Do you want to go first? Where are you?
He's...
Thank you. I appreciate that. I follow you.
Welcome, Scott. Good to see you.
You look exactly the same, Don.
So do you.
But no hair will do wonders. So Bob Fisher, whose voice I love to hear, it's so resonant, said, Scott, I know people said you were such a young guy, but I was younger than you. I was a real baby mayor. It's interesting, one thing that was for me is to grow up with kids like Alex Black, whose father was Donn Black. Cammie Tuttle, who I call my first date, My dad drove us to an Oakland A's game. We sat in the back. She refused to accept a gift of candy. Strong-willed woman. And Norm Tuttle, who's here, and I hope speaks, because he said, Scott, I like that you're young. I know a lot of people don't, but I'm going to support you, and that really helped give me confidence after I lost the first time to then run again and win and serve, and so thank you, Norm, so much. Couple quick things. Our family moved out here from PS 24, Public School 24, to Happy Valley Elementary. I knew things were different immediately, right then. There's people like Tom Cogburn, whose dad, of course, was Martin Cogburn. And there was friends of mine like Brett Howard and Clay Fry that got involved on commissions when they were young, relatively speaking. And a couple of things I wanted to share. The parking meters, I voted for having them, and people to this day still say, you approved taxes. And my response is, parking meters are voluntary and taxes are not. And one thing, I saw the picture of General Lafayette, the statue, is nice to see. It wasn't controversial, but it took more effort, and it took Peter Bedford and a check of $10,000 to make that happen, and that's wonderful to see the public art program and things that have followed that. So I feel blessed to have gone to school at Happy Valley, Stanley and Akalani's, and to know you. Before I shed a tear, I'll sign off and say thank you, and so good to be here.
Now Jean, and then following Jean will be Kathy Merchant. And we have special thanks. This event was organized to some extent by city staff, particularly Jeff and others, but largely by the Chamber, who is our go-to organization in the city for all the events we do. So thank you to the Chamber.
Welcome. Go ahead.
Thanks. Welcome, everyone, and whoever was in charge of this event we really thank you so much. There were a lot of hours put in. My dad was Arnold Beyer. He drove the 1969 Mustang. He could have had any car he wanted, but he drove that. And he loved Lafayette. Let me tell you, I was conceived in 1947. My parents walked from Rockridge Boulevard to Lafayette to Pine Lane and purchased an acre and a third for $2,000. We had to eat beans and sugar sandwiches. I hated it, but we had to save every penny, and there were pennies all over the counter to save money. And the thing about that was, we bought it from Dr. Musser. Does anybody know Dr. Musser in here? Probably not, but it was all horses. Horses were all over Upper Happy Valley. It was amazing. So we still are on Pine Lane. My daughter is in the audience, Tammy Williamson, and we are so pleased to be a part of this particular town. I attended Upper Happy Valley, right up the street from Pine Lane, went to Stanley, and attended Acalanes. I was fortunate enough to be a cheerleader, loved it, lots of competition going to Cal. Both my parents were Cal Berkeley graduates, not bragging, but I didn't make it into Cal because of Spanish. And I am a retired teacher, and with all my children, a lot of them were Mexican, I did not allow them to speak Spanish. But they got through it. I also wanted to tell you that when Mom and Dad walked all the way from Oakland, they were in good shape. And you think now, you don't even want to drive a block or whatever. There was nothing. You were playing outside. We were playing in the rivers. We were building rafts. We didn't have pizza. We didn't have McDonald's. We didn't have any of that. And it seems like it's just yesterday. But the home now was built, back then it was built for $12,000. Now it's over $1.5 million, and it's only a little ranch style, 3-bedroom, 3-bath, 1,900 square feet. Can you imagine what my parents' vision, what they saw? And a lot of in this room know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sorry to say that Daddy's not here, and I see some of you going, oh God, when is this going to be over? I won't point them out, but I'm a teacher and I see everybody's faces. Is that Daddy died of prostate cancer in 2005, and I was fortunate enough to be able to care for him in my home, my other home, because my mom was unable to do that. And he wanted to call everybody, the Hudanes, Lynn Hudane and Carol Singer and Mr. Horn and Don, who he's way back there now. They were all so good to my father, and we had a wonderful memorial. It took me 7 months to plan at the beautiful Memorial Center. And I just miss him dearly. But he would appreciate that I'm talking. But it's very hard because he worked hard for this town not to change too much. He had his little, his yellow pad, and he believed that this town should stay basically the same. So he had a lot of people against him, but he loved and loved and loved this town. I also wanted to say that I'm very fortunate to be a homeowner now at 70 years old and passing it down. That he fought on city council matters. Lynn knows this and Carol knows this. And he got a lot of jobs or events that were moved in the right position, I feel. I'm not as articulate as my father. I should have listened to him. Every time I didn't know a word, he would turn to the dictionary, and I had to read about it. So I just kind of had a very small vocabulary. I don't blame my dad for that. But I wanted to tell you, too, that we have to be proud of this town, and we have to be, all of us, vigilantes. We have to take part. When we see something wrong, we need to speak up. When somebody hits your car, which is so common because everybody I see now, all they do is back up and they don't even look. The Mount Diablo store, for example, you can't even get out of the parking lot. It's amazing. But leaving you with this, I appreciate everybody who's gone before myself, my family, the leaders, and you people that are in this audience now. We need you to step up and be leaders. My age group's not doing it. The 60-year-olds are not doing it, and the 50-year-olds are not doing it. So please step up and get involved and love Lafayette. Thank you for coming.
The next speaker is Kathy Merchant, President of the Chamber, who will be followed by former Mayor Carl Anduri.
I'm actually standing in for our beloved Jay Lifson, who's the executive director of the chamber and is running around, as he always is, making sure that everything runs smoothly. As Don says, the chamber has helped the city put on this event and done a lot of the legwork. I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has been here for 70 years. Oh, great. A few people. Well, I'm also pleased to announce that this is the 70th anniversary of the Lafayette Chamber of Commerce. So, the city asks the chamber to put on all the big events like the Res Run, the Art and Wine Festival, the Restaurant Walk, Dogtown, the events in the park, the music events that are in June and July. So we've had a close partnership with the city. I also just want to, if I had my other hat on, acknowledge that Las Trampas, who serves individuals with developmental disabilities and is along the Moraga Boulevard, that this is their 60th anniversary, and the executive director, Dan Hogue, is standing over there. So we got this.
And then following Carl will be another former mayor, Brandt Andersson.
Well, I just wanted to say that in the years I was on the council, I came to realize there were three very important groups of people that made it a pleasure to serve. And the first is the city staff. You may not realize, but Lafayette is very, very lucky to have the dedicated city staff that you have. In fact, I don't think any city our size has as good a staff as we have. So I'd like to say thank you to all the staff. Second, the city council sits on top of an amazing group of volunteers, and I was always impressed by the Planning Commission, Creek Commission, Design Review, all the people who volunteered to be part of the city government. It's really the hallmark of Lafayette is the volunteerism. Third, I really enjoyed working with the people who were on the council when I was on the council. Erling was on, Ivor was on, but I do want to say that this is for the historians. There was a 6-year period when the council didn't change, and that's a record. There was the period before that was only, well, it changed almost every 2 years, but there were 6 years when all the council members were the same. So it was Don, Mike Anderson, Brandt Andersson, and Carol Federighi. And it was such a pleasure to serve with them. And as was said before, we would disagree on some things, but it was always amicable and always aiming for the best for the city. But the main personal observation here, the first time I visited Lafayette was actually in 1968. It was coming to meet the parents, the Woodnuts at 711 Glenside Circle, and that meeting went okay. And so Sharon and I have been married. It'll be 50 years next year, and I never thought we'd be coming back to Lafayette to live, but it's worked out all right, and thank you to all of you for making this the community it is.
Thank you. One of the things I remember about Carl was that we'd spent a long time trying to build up a reserve. When I joined the council in 1985, the goal was to have $1 million in reserve. In contrast, we now have in excess of $10 million in reserve. But at the same time, we were trying to fix the roads. And we were doing okay on reserve. And Carl came out with this proposal at one meeting to say, let's start spending that reserve on fixing the roads faster and put an extra $1 million a year into road repair. I wasn't too happy at the time, but it was one of the best decisions the council has ever made because we agreed with him. So thank you. Brandt.
So my wife and I moved to Orinda back in 1981 because it was less expensive than San Francisco, and we couldn't afford San Francisco anymore. We got involved there, involved with the Orinda Association and incorporation in 1985, and I was the first new member of the Planning Commission after the original group. So we got to write some of the original statutes for Orinda, on fire safety and second units and whatever needed to be done. And then we decided to, start a family. We needed a little more space. We decided to buy a new house, and Orinda was too expensive, so we came to Lafayette because it was cheaper. That's not true anymore. I learned very quickly what Lafayette is all about. We moved in on a Saturday, so the moving truck came. Spent about 2 hours trying to get up the driveway. Eventually that managed that, and then the telephone people came, and they connected my phone. And the first call, as the telephone guy was leaving, was from the fire marshal in Orinda. And he said, you know that fire safety ordinance that you and Mal Kirby wrote for the Planning Commission? Oh yeah, I said, we decided nothing else was really good, so we'd just write our own. And he said, Lafayette has stolen that. It's going to be on the agenda on Monday night, and you should go down there and tell them what a good law it is. So I said, okay, that's fine. Where did they meet? I didn't know. So I came down on Monday night and, had my 3 minutes at the city council and said, this is a fabulous law. It's well written, it's comprehensive, it relates to the situation we have here in La Miranda. You should pass this, and they did. And the next morning, 2.5 days after moving in, then Mayor Scott Talan, whose voice I've not heard since that day, called me up and said, we have a public safety committee. And one of the members just had a heart attack. He'll be okay, but he has to step aside from the committee. It's just 3 months left on the committee, and you'll be done. 23 years later. Thank you, Scott. That's how Lafayette works. The volunteers, You know, I didn't quite feel it at the time, but I realized now that the hook was in and he caught it. You know, we bring people in, people volunteer. Some of them don't know what they can do, don't know, you know, what they particularly want to do, but know they want to help. And they do. They find a place, and they come in and they volunteer. That's part of the triumvirate. Part of it is, as Councilmember Anduri said, you know, as a staff. The staff has been for many years just outstanding. And as far as that 6 years that I served with Carl and Carol and Don and Mike, I was the last member to join that group. And I'd served a year previously. And so after 6 years, there was a couple new council members came in. And I was talking to the city clerk. I said, Joanne, I said, this is fantastic. For the first time in 7 years, I'm no longer the junior member of the city council. And she said, that's right. Now you're the oldest. Thank you.
So it's my honor to introduce Ms. Jennifer Russell, a Lafayette native and a longtime staff member, who will be followed by Daniel Hogue.
50 years ago, I was an 8th grader at Stanley, and my sister had just gotten her driver's license, and that was really exciting, because especially for my mom, because there were 5 of us kids, and she couldn't wait to have my sister take us all down to Foster's Freeze, which was way at this end of town. So we got to drive all the way down the strip, and I remember going, God, what is with these ugly gas station signs? They're so big, they're so tall. Little did I know that that was like the first thing to happen after incorporation. All those ugly signs went away, and we had these little attractive signs. But it was so much fun growing up in Lafayette. I loved it. We'd take our bicycles from our house to Orchard Nursery for a soda. We used to walk the creeks. We had an amazing network of tree forts in all the oak trees in our neighborhood. And I loved it, and I couldn't wait to start working for the city. And that was a great decision. I started right out of college, and over time, worked with wonderful commissioners, wonderful council members, wonderful staff members. It was just such a positive experience for me. And I did retire, and I do miss the people. I think Lafayette has become so beautiful. It has, I mean, if you remember driving down that strip, it was just gas station, fast food, gas station, fast food. Although I do miss the crab pot. That was awfully fun. And I actually loved Cape Cod. I loved that linen and the waiters that would come, and it just felt like a bit of San Francisco there. But now we have, you know, incredible restaurants, such a huge variety, and I was just eating at the American Kitchen this morning. And I love looking out and seeing so many people that I've known for so many years, and I just love you all, and I'm happy to be here and say, love Lafayette, happy 50th.
And then following Daniel will be Art Ungar, and I'm getting down to the end of the speaker slip, so if you were hoping to be close to the end, now would be a good time to fill out your speaker slip. Welcome.
So I'm sort of a newbie to Lafayette. In 2011, I was lucky enough to take the job to become the executive director of Las Trampas School here in Lafayette, and I moved here in a rush. They said, yeah, you need to be up here in about 2 weeks. And I moved from Fresno, and immediately I realized, oh, you have a gem here. Because one of the first things that you do when you move is you unpack and you get your bed set up and everything, but then you have to get groceries. So I'm standing out in the parking lot in the middle of the night over there at Safeway, And this feeling came over me, and I just couldn't understand it. And I kept asking myself, what is this feeling? And I began to realize, oh my gosh, I'm happy. And while I'm no longer a resident of Lafayette, I do spend 1/3 of my time here as the executive director of Lafayette, and I realize that Lafayette has so many gems in it. You've got the reservoir, you've got a lot of businesses here, you've got a lot of culture, and you've got a lot of people who've actually been here for a very long time. And one of those things that I began to realize as soon as I started working at Las Trampas was that Las Trampas was one of your jewels. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that we're one of the oldest nonprofit, continually operating nonprofits to serve people with developmental disabilities in the state of California and right here in Lafayette. A lot of them started in the bigger cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, and right here in Lafayette you have Las Trampas serving one of the most vulnerable populations and still operating to this day, serving those folks. And I just wanted to thank all of you for the support that you've given to Las Trampas over the years. As our poet laureate has said, times are changing and a lot of things are changing at Las Trampas, and I hope that you support us into the future as we build our new campus. Thank you.
Art Ungar, followed by Dennis Erokan. Art. Hi, welcome.
Arliss and I moved to Lafayette in 1965, so we preceded incorporation by a couple of years. And at one point I served on the Planning Commission, and we benefited over all these years from the work that everyone has done in supporting the city. So I'm very thankful for all that. At the same time, I want to raise the point that while we're being so self-congratulatory, and well-deserved, I must say, it's also been exclusionary to a degree. We have maintained the property values and increased them greatly, but managed in doing that to keep out a lot of people who couldn't afford to live here. Many of us moved here at a time when property was inexpensive, and one of the reasons, as has been mentioned earlier today, one of the reasons that people moved in was because it was cheaper than San Francisco or Berkeley even. So I think we should think about our future and how we could also help others who couldn't be here with us in all these years. Thank you.
Dennis Erokan, followed by Mark Mitchell. Welcome, sir.
Hi, I'm Dennis Erokan. I'm also on the board of the Lafayette Chamber of Commerce, and we all tip our hat to Jay Lifson because he's done some pretty amazing things. Yeah, by the way, somebody started applauding. Go ahead, Jay Lifson. And he's got some great stuff going on all around us today, and you'll see it all when we leave here. So, so to Jay and the Lafayette Chamber, hurrah. So here's a couple of things that I just wanted to mention. I had never heard of Lafayette. I used to publish a music magazine and put on one of the big music award shows in the Bay Area, and we were over on the other side of the tunnel, and I'd never heard of Lafayette. And then one of the rock stars that I wanted to interview. Does anybody remember Greg Kinn? Yeah. Okay. So Greg used to live right behind the, well, somebody mentioned it, those apartments that were going to turn into condos, but we kept them from being condos. He was one of those that lived in those apartments. Yeah, and so I went and visited him, and he loved Lafayette, and he showed me around, and he said, you know, see that graveyard there? I'm going to be in there someday. And he still isn't. So what can I tell you about that? But that was the first rock star that I met in Lafayette, and then a few months later, does anybody remember Eddie Money? Okay, So I get this call from Eddie Money, and Eddie says, you know, I want you to come over and visit me. I'm in this town called Lafayette. And I said, I know Lafayette. So I drive over there, drive up the hill, and go to his place. And he's just in seventh heaven. He loves Lafayette. He's just been having this great time. He also tells me about another band that grew up and lived in Lafayette, and they were called Metallica. Anybody remember them? Yeah, so there was a yes or two, so you remember some of them, you know, lived here, and I would see them in Safeway, and they would go, shh. They didn't want anyone to know that a big rock star was walking through there. And the fun thing about Eddie is that one of my oldest friends ended up living across the driveway from Eddie Money, and so he would tell me he would get the weirdest stuff left on his doorway that was supposed to be for Eddie, and it went to Carrie instead, and Carrie said, I can't have any of this stuff. So he would take it across the driveway to Eddie, and Eddie would thank him. So that was nice. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention was the Town Hall Theater. The Town Hall Theater is in one of the oldest buildings in Lafayette. It's over 100 years old, and the theater itself is the theater company is 74 years old and putting on some of the greatest shows, and I want you all to go there if you haven't and see the fabulous shows there. It's just a great place, and back when I first started helping them out, back in the turn of the century, they were just barely hanging on by their fingernails, and so I did a little bit of research and found out that what Lafayette had was families, and families mean kids, and kids mean school. And so I suggested that we start a theater school at the Town Hall Theater. And it turned the Town Hall Theater completely around financially. But the fun thing was, so I was at the board meeting explaining all this, and Ed Stokes of Diablo Foods. Anybody know Ed Stokes? Yeah. He should be here today. Anyhow, Ed Stokes says, Dennis, you are absolutely right. You are now the president of the board. And I said, Ed, I'm not on the board. And he said, oh, all in favor say aye. So I was the president of the board for 8 years, and we had a great time. Anyhow, great working with you, and the Lafayette Chamber says hi.
Mark Mitchell, who is current council member, followed by Fred Rauazza, who I think may be our longest tenure living in Lafayette. I think it's 83 or 84 years, Fred.
Hello, and thank you. I recognize many of you people from city council meetings, and I feel obligated to raise my hand and say, I've lived in this city for 50 years. And so it's important, I think, to remember how the city has changed. Don Tatzin had given us the assignment that we were to ask ourselves what incorporation means and why did the city do it. And the city really was in a period of change. From 1960 to 1970, the population went from roughly 7,000 to almost 20,000, increase of over 280%. So there was a lot of change going on at that time. And if you could have watched the rest of that barely watchable video of the first meeting, one of the speakers goes on and talks about how they were talking about putting BART down the train tracks and how they were talking about putting a waterway through Lafayette. So from my perspective, the reason why the city went through all this effort was so that they could have some control over their destiny. And I think it's worked out really well. So I just wanted to point out 5 things that are similar or have changed over the last 50 years. The first thing I'll get to is my parents moved to Lafayette from San Leandro in the summer of '57 when I was 3 months old, looking for a beautiful community and one with affordable housing prices. For $15,000, they purchased a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house where my mom still lives in today. So obviously the prices have changed a little. At the end of Carroll Lane, where my neighborhood was composed primarily of World War II GIs that have moved to Lafayette from Oakland in the East Bay. And that's similar too, because we still find people wanting to move to Lafayette, maybe not so much for affordable prices. Because the great influx of people during that period, there were 8 elementary schools at that time. Now we're down to 4. So that's a big change. But what I wanted to point out was I think the schools are even better today with the LPI, the PTA, the teachers, and the school volunteers. I think our schools are even stronger now than they were when I was growing up. The fourth thing is the times in 1960s were a lot slower. We enjoyed school sports, LMYA. Soccer was not yet an LMYA sport. Neighborhood pools, scouts, and churching events. In general today, the kids have a lot more opportunities, but back in the 1960s, we had a lot more autonomy as children. Even young kids, under the supervision of their older but not very old siblings, would go outside and play at the request of our parents and only come home when called for dinner or it got too dark. So that's a little bit different. And in conclusion, we were green in some ways before we even knew about sustainability. I think our parents were raised in a Depression era who did not either had a lot of money or they were just raised frugally. So growing up, our family only had one car. So neighborhood carpooling was common. My dad took the public transportation, Greyhound bus, from Lafayette to San Francisco. We did not have a clothes dryer, so my mom hung out the clothes on a clothesline. We took a publicly funded bus system to Spring Hill Elementary School, and I rode my bike to Stanley and Acalanes. In conclusion, I would say Lafayette is a fantastic place because of the people who live here. We're obviously blessed with a beautiful town, but it's people like the regular citizens, the coaches, Lafayette Homeowners Council, the city staff, and the Chamber of Commerce who have made Lafayette what it is today. So I'm very grateful of that. Thank you to you all, and love Lafayette.
Fred, welcome.
Well, here, I'm Fred Rauazza. I've been here almost 84 years. So, originally, my father and my uncles, they came here and, right after the earthquake in San Francisco, 06. And they farmed here and there. And they bought the land in 1929, Glen Road and Monticello, was 230 acres. I'm sorry, 320, and then some they let go, but they bought it for $16,000. And from then on, they farmed. And it was very simple. They were all farmers. Why did they come here? It's because what the soil was like. There's a difference. They grew everything, was dry farming. There's no irrigation here. And all the farming was done, the trick what they learned in Europe. They came from Italy and came here and settled. And they used to plant tomatoes. They used to beefsteak tomatoes and bring them down to Heinz Cannery in Oakland. And they used to plant them 8 feet apart, no irrigation, about 1.5 feet deep. So how did they get the moisture to the plants? They used to go with the cultivator, and they brought the moisture to the plant because all these valleys and the rain coming down, and they had the soil, and it was a dark soil, it retained the moisture, and that's how they did it. And on like that. And they farmed, and they were all farmers. They all farmed the same way. And these were all Italian farmers, a lot of them, in the flat. And that's the way it was. And it was simple. We had no police force, nobody. It was just wide open country. And that's the way it was. So I'm talking about the 30s. I'm not talking about after they incorporated. That's way after what I'm talking about. And so it was very simple, and I was raised on organic food. So when you talk organic food to me that you buy, I'm sorry, I can't buy it. But that's the way it was. There was no insecticide, and how they did it, they plowed this mustard grass that used to get about high as the tractor, and they would plow that under, and that was your natural fertilizer. That was it. And but they did very well, and up until my dad wanted to retire after World War II. And which was interesting, they used to deliver the gas to the ranch, to the farm, 9 cents a gallon. And all this stuff here, but it was very simple, there was nothing here. And I believe there was one guy, he had a little small piece of land, and the sheriff's office in Martinez was paying him $25 a month to be like a custodian. You know, he had a badge and a thing, that was it. There was nothing else. So I'm, like I say, this is way back then. I know some of you are probably older than me, but I was probably here more years. And it was really a peaceful place to grow up. Very simple. I used to drive to Lafayette, and I could barely see through the steering wheel. I was 9 years old, and come to town. There was nobody. Didn't make any difference. There was nobody here. And so that was my life. And very simple, very, very easy, and quiet. I mean, at night, when the sun went down and it got dark, boy, it got dark. There was nothing. You didn't see any lights around. And, but it all changed, and I heard a lot of different stories that people, they come here and they'll say, I don't want that there. Well, one lady told me this, and you know how they put up a frame of a house that they're going to make? And she was saying, I don't want that. I don't want it here. I'm going to go to the city council. So I got kind of a little bit annoyed. I said, well, how long you been here? She said, 6 years. I said, I didn't want you here either. But it was, and my cousins, which they're a little older than me, and of course they're all passed on now, and they had to go to Monte Diablo to high school. There was no high school here. The youngest cousin was the first graduating class at Akalani's, Angelo Rossi. He just passed away a few years ago. So anyway, so a lot of things have changed. The people that I knew, I think of the original farmers or people that were here that are left that I know of, is just me and my brother. He's 3 years older than me. So that's it.
Okay, so our next speaker is Ditto Clark. He will be followed by Vice Mayor Cam Burks.
Hi, I'm Ditto Clark. I was 18, excuse me, in 1968 when I attended a meeting of the Lafayette Democratic Club. And I heard 19 of the 20 candidates who were running for city council just in case Lafayette became a city. And I liked them all, but I was very impressed with one of them, and that was Bob Fisher. And I volunteered to work on his campaign. And he came in first by 5 votes, and I knew that I got him at least 5 votes. So I was very proud of that. And then in the 1980s, there was a lot of instability in Lafayette city government. There had been 5 city managers in 5 years, and nobody was happy about that. So the Lafayette City Council created a citizen search committee for a new city manager. And I had the privilege of serving on that commission. And our chair was Dick Trudeau, who had recently retired from the East Bay Regional Park District. And it was a buyer's market. There were a lot of really good candidates out there. And we brought the best ones to Lafayette. And we had a assessment center where we had all sorts of round-robin hypotheticals and interviews and things. And there were city managers from nearby cities who were helping us with this process. And all of the Lafayette residents liked best one particular candidate. And the city managers from nearby cities liked a different candidate. They thought this other candidate would be best for Lafayette. Lafayette is different from other places, and people who live in Lafayette understood even better than we could articulate what was right for Lafayette. And all the city managers from nearby cities had a different idea. So we made our recommendations to the city council, and the city council unanimously voted for the candidate recommended by the Lafayette residents, and that was Bob Adams. And we all loved him, and he was here for a long time. And he hired Steve Falk to be his assistant. And Steve Falk has been here a long time, and we all love him. So it was pretty special and amazing that we go from 5 city managers in 5 years to 2 city managers in the last many decades. So it's just really great. And I'm very proud to have played a tiny little role in that. But I'm sorry, I forgot. One reason I'm here is that now I'm running for County Board of Education. and I need the help of all Lafayette residents. I will be on the ballot in November. And I brought handouts, and I hope you'll all get one and help me get elected, and thank you very much.
All right, well, I know we're moving it on 4. I'm going to let Vice Mayor Burke speak, and then I just have some closing remarks, and it'll be on to dinner and music.
Okay, well, I will be quick because I know I am between food and everybody moving on. But thank you very much. I'm Cam Burks. I'm the vice mayor, and I'm definitely a newbie here. My family moved here in 2011, and a couple things, just very briefly. We moved here because of the schools primarily, and we've had a fantastic experience. I got 2 daughters that are in our school district, so I wanted to thank the school board, our new superintendent, Richard Whitmore, and Rachel Zinn, who just left. We've got some members of the school board, Teresa, and some others that are here. We've got fantastic schools, and it's great schools, and Green Hills, I think, is our motto. So fantastic environment for us, and we've had a great experience so far. I joined the city council about 18, 19 months ago, and I did so because I had been on the Crime Prevention Commission and had had some interaction with our city council and was just blown away with how functional, respectful, and professional our council and our council members were with each other. And I think we're really, really fortunate, I think, to have that dynamic and through our city staff. And one of the things that I got to experience and became just very well entrenched around over the last 19 months was associated with a person standing behind me. And that's our mayor. And before you start clapping, because I'm going to ask for a standing ovation in a minute, we're gonna have a lot of time to say some great things about Don and our mayor over the next few months. But I wanted to, while we had a captive audience and an audience that has just made Lafayette really what it is today, just a fantastic group of people, I wanted to just take a minute to say how much Don has done for this city. For 33 years of our 50 incorporated, he has been on the city council. For 38, he's been involved in the city, I think first on parks and trails, and then on planning, if I don't, maybe those two reversed. But I think I'd just like to end with a big round of applause for what Don has done for the city. And it's just his legacy will live on forever here. And I'm just so proud and honored to sit next to him this year on the city council. So Don, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I got to be the last speaker of this session. So here's my story. I know people commonly move to Lafayette now, not for the low housing prices, but for the schools. And so my story is similar to that, but there's a twist. I first moved to California in 1974 for several months while I had a job in downtown San Francisco. At that point, I chose to live in Marin since it was the first part of the Bay Area I hit as I was driving across country from Boston. And I enjoyed my commutes across either the Golden Gate Bridge or by ferry. And then I left for 18 months to enjoy a Rotary Foundation fellowship and got a master's degree in economics at the Australian National University, knowing that I could come back to my job in San Francisco. A former fraternity brother of mine from Boston was he and I were going to room together so we could save money, and he was going to get a graduate degree at Berkeley. So moving back to Marin was out. But I had grown up in relatively small towns, and Cambridge, Massachusetts was too crowded for me, and Berkeley, California was too crowded for me. So I sat in my home in Florida before I drove out, thinking about, well, where was I going to look for a place to live? And I saw these little towns that weren't big enough to be demarcated as cities on the map, Lafayette and Orinda. And I said, well, I'll start with one of those. And so, like many people, I did move to Lafayette in 1976 for the schools, but in my case, it was my roommate's choice of graduate school at Berkeley. And like many of us, once I arrived, I saw no reason to leave. And now with Ellen, we're in our third home on the same block. So why do I think incorporation is important? Well, simple. We're large enough to enjoy economies of scale in providing local services without being so large that bureaucracy takes over or that people cannot feel connected and influential. And having hit that sweet spot, the sky has been the limit for what we can accomplish. Lafayette was incorporated by great and visionary people we've heard from today, the 49ers, the many others who volunteered. The framework that they created, including the general plan, the history of fiscal responsibility, reliance on volunteers, and viewing the council role as an opportunity to serve others rather than as a stepping stone for higher office, remain in place. Thank you. Those of us who the residents have chosen to follow you have had the honor to work with the solid foundation you laid and the structure you built. We've been able to strengthen that foundation. While we incorporated as a no property tax city through the efforts of Dick Holmes, we now get some property tax without you having to pay anymore. And it's now our largest revenue source. We adorned the structure that you built with parks, a community center, trails, walkways, a larger police force, a much more vibrant downtown, the Veterans Memorial Building, and this library. We've retained a great staff and forged closer partnerships with our schools and the chamber. Together, we've formed a virtuous circle that makes this one of the great communities of the Bay Area. So we are a community now where the motto of great schools, green hills seems fitting, and where no one thinks that it's odd when people say, love Lafayette, in casual conversation. That's an accomplishment for which all of us can feel proud. So we've gone a little bit past our time. I think the band is, if they're not playing already, they're going to start soon. So again, thank you all for coming and sharing. We're going to leave this open for people who want to stay and mingle. The band today is Dave Martin's house party, and many of you will know the connection. Dave Martin is the son of Jaap and Irene Van Overveen, longtime Lafayette residents. And so we're delighted that they were able to come and be our entertainment and enjoy the rest of the afternoon and evening. Again, congratulations and love Lafayette. There's been a request if the former mayors and council members who are in the audience could come to the stage, we'll get a group photo.
It's all in the tips.
Excellent.